Well, good morning. Thank you for the invitation, Christian and the coordinators. It's the green one, right? No, okay. I'm not a risk management specialist, and I was asked to talk from my experience in housing advisory to housing production and against housing eviction also, to talk from my experience how did the team appear during this experience. So my focus will be the bottom-up approach on housing production. Oh, it's over there. I was looking for the... Well, it will be three parts: the social production of habitat in Brazil, then challenges for risk management in the social production of habitat, and suggestion for risk management in the social production of habitat. I don't know if you are used to this expression, the concept of social production of habitat. It is being constructed by HIC, Habitat International Coalition, and you can see it by two ways. By the negative is the production of houses not done by market or by governments, but of course I prefer to look at it at the positive definition, is the one done by the people. There are two ways of very schematically, two ways of doing it. The self-built, we are talking here these days, slums, favelas, informal settlements. And I always remember, I don't know, especially the young audience, the famous John Turner, urbanist of United Kingdom. He visited a slum he was taken to visit a slum to see the problem of the slums. I don't remember if it was Brazil or Colombia. And he said, well, I'm not looking at the problem, I'm looking at the solution. People without finance, without land, surveyed land, without technical assistance, they are able to construct their shelter. So, but the other way is the collective, is the point that I'm bringing here for this discussion about risk management, how collective social production of habitat can be a pathway for that risk management. Indeed, informality is a risk, but it's also a strength, as John Turner and I just said. The big cities in Rio, and it's the same in Latin America and Africa and other countries on the south, they have 30 to 50% of the homes built informally. There are cities in Brazil like Belém, Recife, that reaches this figure of 50%. Half of the city was done by the people without finance, without technical assistance, etc. So this is Rocinha, a famous slum in Rio de Janeiro, where more than 100,000 people live, and all constructed by themselves. Well, moving for my point is the social production being done collectively. Why that can be a turning point? First, it takes the advantage of and virtues of self-build, the strengths of the people, and the closeness of the people to the process. As I said, a bottom-up process, I think, is the only way you can build this better environment and better housing, because people are close to the process and they are not receiving in the caritative way. And also the collective process avoids constraints like lack of finance, technical assistance, etc. So for me, and that's what I'm bringing here, although the self-build is a solution, but we should qualify this process by turning it collective and also being supported, especially by finance and technical assistance. And I think that's the point that I bring here. This is not the only way, but one special way to do risk management in a more proper and a more sustainable way. Well, social production of the habitat in Brazil began in the 80s, at the end of the dictatorship. We had some pilot experiences. These two experiences are in Rio de Janeiro, in the NGO that I work. And the scope, I think this is obvious, but people organize themselves together and they contract technical assistance, search for land and finance. And before that, they discuss how they're going to structure their organization in a cooperative, in association, how they will do that, the statutes of their entity. So all this discussion is a formalizing process, is interesting because poor people are getting organized and achieving the tools for the housing production. They search for land and finance, they coordinate the project development, obtain licenses, and then manage the construction process and the afterwards when they are living over there. So in the 90s, with pilot experience, I'm focusing in Brazil because I want to show that it's possible to scale up a process like this. And of course, it's my country and I know about it. With the pilot's experience, the return to democracy and increasing housing deficit, social movements, grassroots groups, NGOs, academia, they struggle for a legal framework, finance, and public policies, both for urban development, for right for the cities, but also for social housing. So, because one important issue here, collective production, the problems that we face in our cities and in regard especially housing, of course, the cause is income distribution between countries, inside every country. It needs political will for changing. But at the third level, let's say it, institutional arrangement for the production of houses is a strategic theme. You must have more fair and income distribution between countries and inside the countries. You have to have the political will, but you have to do it in a different way we have done for the 100 and more years in our country. So that's why the institutional arrangement for me is a strategic theme for better housing, including the risk management issue. So when President Lula went to power, he went in 2003, and he launched the first program called Crédito Solidário, and then 5 years later, a bigger one called Minha Casa, Minha Vida, My Life, My House, My Life, in translating. Here we can see how it jumped, the relation between real estate credits, investment, and the GDP in Brazil. In 2008, it was more or less 2.2%. And with this program, it jumped to almost 10% of our GDP. This is a comparison with other countries, but just to show how a political will can elect housing including as a macroeconomic strategy, and this was the case. So the program contracted 4.3 million units. That's important because this is more or less from 2009 to 2017. This was more or less the demand for houses in Brazil for that period. For the first time, the number of houses financed by the state was more or less the number of houses needed. Here, let me make a difference, because when I say the number of houses needed was due to population growth. We have in Brazil, as most countries, also a huge deficit. In Brazil, the deficit is 6 million, more or less, nowadays 6 million units. So to eradicate the problem in this period should be built more or less 10 million houses, 4 million for the new families, new demand, and 6 million for the deficit. But what I'm bringing here, for the first time, we had a very expressive number of houses produced. And almost half of it was reached for the first time the really poor in our country. 1.7 million of these units were produced, were directed for the most poorest, the ones that earn up to 180 euros. And that's my point here, 15% of those 1.7 millions were done by cooperative housing associations, by the people organized by themselves, both rural and urban entities. This is interesting. At this moment, we have more or less 66,000 units proposed by these institutions inside the Caixa, the bank that analyzes the proposals. If all of them were approved, this would be more or less 12% of the demand this year for new houses in Brazil. So I'm talking about social production of the habitat can be expressive, speaking in terms of numbers. This is the increasing capacity. This is another point. When you have a program, well, I worked in this program. My presentation says I work. I don't work anymore in federal government. We had a coup in Brazil, and this program is being destroyed, etc. But of course, one of the problems we were creating at that time a capacity building program, but although we didn't have it, you can see the capacity of the entities to elaborate, and the bureaucracy to get the licenses, all that is very hard. So people were getting more and more able to organize projects and present to the government. Here's some photographs of some of these projects. This is in Rio de Janeiro, some proposals. This is important. This is one is being done in São Paulo, is more or less 400 units, and it's 12 or 13-story buildings. So this is to show, because of course there are some mutirão, but it's more a pedagogical, the mutual help process. But these buildings, for instance, people organize themselves, they contract a private enterprise for doing the foundation, another one for doing the walls. People are capable of organizing such a complex process of building like those. This is a typical and traditional historical production of houses in Brazil. I'm bringing it to show it the difference. I must confess here, I brought the best examples of social production of habitat and the worst of the traditional. Not kidding. What I'm saying, in the average, of course, we have bad examples of social production of habitat, and we have good examples done by private sectors and by governments, of course. But the point here is, in the average, where you can see innovation, where you can see more closeness for the demand of the people, is by the social process of habitat. This one in the left side for you is one by entity in Bahia. It's not just finished, and you see it's more, the project is more adopted for the topography, and the other one is very common. The companies just do a. Well, the most important side effect, I'm not going to talk, I think it's obvious. I love this photograph. This is a participatory process of doing the architectural and urbanist project for this. This is in Maranhão, state of Brazil, and the faces of these people, for me, tells everything. So participation, solidarity, and citizenship. This is another process of participatory process of doing the project. This, when I was in the federal government, this meeting, this was at the end, people were more, but it was a meeting asked by the indigenous people to complain because the program was not, the guidelines, the patterns were not made for them. So they asked a meeting with us to discuss and to produce changes in the program. I put this photograph to show that not only the bottom-up process of doing the houses, but also the bottom-up process of doing the policy. This is very important. The governments and maintain open to this to this dialogue. Well, this will be more, as I said, I'm not a specialist in risk management. I read something that was done, including by the Ministry of the City in Brazil. If anyone wants more to know what was done, the policy, I have some documents here, but especially I can present the context. How many time I have? No. Oh. Well, just 2 or 3 minutes. Three challenges for me for risk management. First of all, risk is not a priority for people. And I include myself. So, because present has too many demands for the poor people, they have to survive, they have the unemployment, they have to, the demands of the present are so urgent that future risk management, something that can happen in the future, is not seen as a priority. A different logic also. I remember many years ago, this was a landslide in a city, Petrópolis, near Rio de Janeiro, and I went there because people died in this landslide, and we were there to organize the people in a cooperative to rebuild their homes in another plot. And I'd never forget an old lady. She was still in her house, and people were trying to convince her to go out, and said, "No, it's opposite of what you are saying. It rained so much, and my house didn't fall down, so it proved that my house is safe." I never forgot this statement. I'm not saying she's right. I'm not saying she's wrong. What's important here is a different logic. No, what was seen by the technicians that was a proof that plot was unsafe, for her it was a proof that her plot was safe. The second challenge is a very bad reputation risk management. In Brazil, in many countries, risk arguments are frequently used as an excuse for eviction and gentrification. I'm running out of time. I'm not going to go deeper in this issue, but I think this is a challenge. This community, this was a manifestation. They were treated of eviction with the argument that they were in an environmental area. They had risk of landslides. They won their struggle, and the risk was never came reality. So I think this is a challenge to deal with regarding the people. The third challenge is risk management is seen by the people. Well, I'm talking about the licenses, the codes, everything. Is seen and often is a bureaucracy, a checklist. So I think what challenge is to transform not in a checklist, but in something that is seen by the people and by the bureaucracy as something measures that should be done in order to prevent future risk. And to finish, 3 suggestions. The first one, well, as I said, the Brazil made a policy about risk management, and it had 3 components. Risk mapping, structural intervention plan with containment of slopes, etc., and the prevention plan. What I'm suggesting here that, of course, all these local process plans should be done with a deep participatory perspective. Second one, I think informal settlements, you cannot go to a community only to cope with the risk, houses in the risk areas. This will be seen as a strategy for eviction. You should have a broadened perspective. You should do informal settlements regularizations approach, where you're going to do land regularization, urban regularization, slopes, containers, and of course, if needed, to replace people and rebuild their homes nearby where they were living. So instead of having a focus on risk management, you always should be risk management, a scope of a broadened perspective. And the last one is very important. I have a video here, but we won't have time to see it. I think that it's very important that the participatory process has to find the adequate and suitable tools for that. I think education is a key word, transparency is the guideline, and the safe paceway is information. I never forget also a leadership in the cooperative in São Paulo many years ago, and he said something that I never forgot. He said, what causes transparency, what causes participation is information. You must deliver information in order that people have the participatory tools for that. So I finish with this statement by a famous educador of Brazil, Paulo Freire: education don't change the world, education changes the people, and people, they change the world. Thank you very much.
Muito obrigado.